A package holiday trip to the sun-soaked beaches of Cayo Coco, Cuba? Well, not really. We were taking advantage of a cheap flight and accommodation to get ourselves to somewhere interesting. And then we planned to hire a car and get ourselves out of there. We had chosen the Hotel Crystal Laguna, built around a group of saltwater lagoons that promised some interesting wildlife. The room was fairly basic, but clean and comfortable, but without a balcony. It would do. It looked out on a scrubby garden area, and we made quick work of dumping the bags and heading out there. There were ticks to be had, and we could already see some in the garden. Time to explore further. Cuba has only 3 hummingbirds, one endemic to the island and a second being a near-endemic. Here we found the near-endemic, the charming Cuban emerald, found only in Cuba and Bahama. The endemic, the bee hummingbird, the world's smallest bird, wouldn't be seen on this trip, and the non-endemic was the ruby-throated hummer that we were already well acquainted with. We enjoyed great views of the Cuban emerald, even to wondering why its bill was splotched with yellow. It was of course pollen from the flowers it was feeding on. Also in the grounds were common ground doves, foraging for seeds on the floor. And there was another new bird for us, red-legged thrush. This bird is endemic to Cuba, Bahama, and most of the Greater Antilles. We were very pleased with our finds so far in our first few hours in Cuba. Heading towards the beach, which was separated from the main hotel by the aforementioned lagunas, we were pleased to find a young night heron poking its head out from the waterside vegetation. After some consideration, it was pronounced to be a yellow-crowned night heron. Excellent. So far, the choice of hotel was proving to be perfect for us. Birds in the grounds are always welcome. A Zenaida dove joined our list next as we made our way to the boardwalks that crisscrossed the lagunas, edged with upmarket villas. The water was shallow but still had life, such as this great barracuda. One species we were looking for, but without much expectation, was the West Indian whistling duck. They had been reported from here in the past, but not frequently, so we were delighted when a small group turned up on the laguna. Mark decided on an eye-level view for photographs. The arrow shows where the birds actually were. The eye-level view seemed to work well for the portraits, even if it did get us some bemused looks from the other hotel patrons. It seemed that we were the only birders on site, unsurprisingly perhaps. Despite checking the area on several subsequent days, we never saw this species again, so it was a very lucky and memorable encounter with some very special birds. Perhaps the most common fish species in the lagunas was this well-named yellowfin mohara. The beach was joined to the hotel complex via this boardwalk that crossed the laguna and a section of mangrove and dunes. It was a nice beach, if you like that sort of thing, but once we had checked it for birds, a couple of laughing gulls was the only species seen. We had seen our fill and so headed back to the more fruitful hotel gardens. Back in the gardens we found our next new species, Western spindalis. Back then it had only just changed its name from stripe-headed tanager. At least the first part of the old name was quite descriptive, even though it isn't a tanager. It is a near-endemic of Cuba, Bahama, and the Cayman Islands. Nearby, a Cuban black hawk was perched on a hotel building. This species is an endemic, found in coastal regions and outlying islands like Cayo Coco, where it eats mainly crabs but also some fish, lizards, rodents, and birds. The population is declining due to degradation and draining of habitats for the building of tourist infrastructure. Not too surprising, seeing how much Cuba relies on tourism for much of its income. That night we dined at the hotel's Los Portales buffet and then retired, intent on early breakfast. We would be picking up our hire car and then heading out to explore the Cayos. Cayo Coco is one of the largest of a string of islands off the northern coast of Cuba, many of them connected by bridges and causeways. A Cuban bullfinch was our next endemic species. This one was in a flowerbed at the hotel entrance and posed very nicely. It wasn't long before the representative from Cuba-Cayo, the government-run and only car hire firm in Cuba, arrived to lead us to our little hire car. It was a Hyundai, tiny but reliable. It would be fine for our purposes. The red number plate, starting with T, indicated that this was a tourist vehicle. We headed out and almost immediately found birds, Cuban gnatcatchers to be precise, which are endemic to the northern and southeastern coasts of Cuba. We were doing pretty well for birds with Cuban in the name. We were heading towards Cayo Guillermo, and the coastal hotels were thinning out. At the time, Cayo Guillermo was almost undeveloped and so was a haven for some special species. The situation has changed now, with 10 hotels and resorts reported in 2022. Cuba's best beach, Playa Pilar, is situated at the far end and we would be heading towards that. First though, we would be looking at the shallow sea around the causeway joining Guillermo to Coco, and a small pool on the landward side of the road that was a magnet for waterbirds. Here we enjoyed watching a reddish egret on the seaward side. We don't see very many of those. The pool on the landward side was a haven for white ibis and black-necked stilts. Cayo Coco is named for the white ibis, known as the coco, or coconut bird locally. The taller scrub at the side of the road was a good spot for Cuban peewee, another endemic of Cuba and the Bahamas. The distinctive white crescent behind the eye is a very obvious field mark.
Okay.
Oddly maybe, the bird we really wanted to see here wasn't a Cuban endemic, but a bird also found in Bahama, the Turks and Caicos Islands, and even Jamaica, that is the Bahama mockingbird. A regular sight for this species was at the end of Cayo Guillermo, by Playa Pilar, so we were going to look. As we arrived, we could hear a bird singing, the Bahama mockingbird was in. Back on Cayo Coco and at our hotel, an evening stroll found a couple of northern flickers of the Cuban race decorating the roof of the security gatehouse. We were amused by this veteran car, pulling a very unbecoming trailer in the car park by our hotel block. It would have been fun to drive, but they don't let you hire the old cars in Cuba. Of more interest was an American kestrel of the Cuban subspecies, sitting in a tree and holding a lizard that it had evidently just caught. We watched as it quickly dispatched and swallowed the hapless lizard, leaving only the tip of its tail visible, emerging from the bird's beak. The Cuban race of American kestrel is very similar to the nominate race, except for its white breast with few markings. A bird from Canada is inset for comparison. The next morning we were targeting Zapata sparrow, an endemic found in 3 distinct locations, in the southwest around Zapata, in the southeast near Guantanamo, and here on the Cays. We thought we'd try a local wildlife park, a very odd place with captive local species. We had the place to ourselves. It proved to be a lucky spot as we found our first Key West quail dove, feeding round the animal pens. A little time looking around the animal exhibit yielded up a black and white warbler, shiny cowbird, northern water thrush, and La Sagra's flycatcher for the trip list. The animal exhibits included American crocodile, wild boar, and Desmarest's hutia, an endemic rodent-like mammal that used to be hunted for food. It would have been nice to see the latter species in the wild rather than with its face in a food bowl. We headed out to the pre-Columbian native village designed to show how the Taino people had lived, apparently in huts on stilts situated out in the water. The good thing here was several groups of American flamingos, fairly close by as we negotiated the boardwalk. Loggerhead kingbird is endemic to the northern Caribbean islands. Now we were heading east, the opposite direction to Cayo Guillermo, to Cayo Romano and then on to Cayo Paredon Grande, then the best site to find the near-endemic thick-billed vireo. The connection between Cayo Romero and Paredon Grande was via this quite frightening narrow and potholed causeway. The bridge had not been completed and it did not look like it ever would be. There is a large resort at the end of Paredon Grande nowadays, so I assume access is not by this causeway. It would be amusing to see the tourists' faces if the transfer bus suddenly started to lurch along this. At the other end we came across this Cuban Black Hawk, providing excellent views as it steadfastly ignored us. The then unoccupied K roads were bordered with thick scrub, perfect habitat for thick-billed vireo, and we did indeed find one. It wasn't keen to be immortalized in pixels though, even though it was singing from deep in the bushes. We had to make do with Cuban vireo and Oriente warbler instead. Both are Cuban endemics and so very good to see. We wonder how the habitat and the birds are faring, now that Cayo Paredon Grande is being gradually built on. Also here was the not endemic prairie warbler. Late afternoon we returned to Cayo Coco and visited the Cuevas del Jabali, or wild boar caves. This was an unusual nightclub, actually occupying a cave, but we hadn't come to dance the night away. No, we were interested in the car park and entrance road, a reputed spot for those Zapata sparrows. We didn't see any. However, an ovenbird provided excellent views and, just down the road we enjoyed another western spindalis. Next morning we decided to head for the mainland. We were planning a little away trip and wanted to know the score about driving to the mainland across the astonishing 27 kilometers or 17-mile-long causeway crossing the Bay of Dogs from Cayo Coco to Morillon. A small tower at the mainland end acts as a toll gate. There was no problem crossing, once we had shown our passports and paid a small fee. On the way over we enjoyed seeing an enormous group of double-crested cormorants, gulls, the inevitable white ibis and an obliging royal tern. On the other side, the highlight of the trip was a great lizard cuckoo which flew into a tree above our heads. This is a near-endemic species, found only in Cuba and the Bahamas, and a real treat to see so well. Our reconnoitre had gone well. Tomorrow we would head out for a night away, somewhere on the mainland. In the meantime, and in darkening skies, we headed back over the causeway to Cayo Coco and our hotel. First though, another go at Cuevas del Jabali for Zapata sparrow. Still no luck. A gorgeous hooded warbler was some compensation though. Add in a greater Antillean grackle and a jaunty red-legged thrush and it was a good stop. We took an early dinner because we wanted to go after night birds. Some lagoons at the end of Flamingo Road. There were no flamingos, looked good for nightjars, and so it proved. Cuban nightjars, or Greater Antillean nightjars, hawked over the lagoons in the fading light. No photos, of course. Fairly early the next morning we headed back over the causeway, ready to make our way to Park La Belen, where we hoped to get a room at Rancho La Belen. The roads were very quiet through Esmeralda and even when we joined the Trans-Cuba highway. In a journey of some 4 hours we were stopped only once at a police checkpoint, where our passports and tourist visas were perused. It wasn't a problem, it took only minutes before we were waved onwards with a salute. At Park La Belen, we entered the gravelled track and headed towards the Rancho, a well-known stop on the birder circuit. We hadn't actually booked but thought we'd be okay. It was hard to get along as we were forced to stop to look at West Indian woodpeckers. At the Rancho, the staff seemed surprised to see us drop in, and they spoke almost no English, whilst our Spanish is woeful. We did manage to get a room, breakfast, and an evening meal organised, and access to the trails. Great. Bags dumped and back out there to see what we could find. This was a big want-to-see bird, the Cuban parakeet. This Cuban endemic has a small and fragmented range and so the population is considered vulnerable. This individual was to be our only sighting. They are not found on the Cays. Also here was our first Cuban trogon, another endemic and the national bird of Cuba because its plumage colors match those of the Cuban flag. Although it is widespread in Cuba, it is rare on the offshore islands, which is why we hadn't come across one up to now. A small pond at the side of the track was home to a couple of smooth-billed annies. There was a bird that we wanted very much to see. This was the tiny, endemic Cuban toady. Said to be very common, we hadn't had a sniff of one so far. Here we were finally to come across them and what great little birds they are. Actually, we realized we'd been hearing them everywhere, even if they were surprisingly difficult to see, despite being iridescent green and white, with patches of red, blue and yellow. We also found grey kingbirds perching on the barbed wire fences. Dinner, a typical Cuban fried chicken dish, was taken in this pleasant open-air building, followed by a good night's sleep. We were pleased with our decision to go exploring. It was certainly paying off with new species. And here was another one, Cuban parrot, or Cuban Amazon, endemic to Cuba, the Cayman Islands and Bahama. This individual, the only one we were to see, was missing part of its tail feathers. It certainly didn't stop it from getting about. West Indian woodpeckers were busy nesting. Another great find here was the giant kingbird, yet another Cuban endemic and only found in a few widely separated places on the island. We were extremely pleased to have seen this one. And now we had finally seen a Cuban toady, we were going to see them everywhere. Still, who could possibly complain? Leaving Rancho La Belen mid-morning, we made our way to the village near the gate of the park. We were hoping to find Pedro Regalado, an eminent Cuban ornithologist, to pick up some gen on the area. We found his house, knocked and were welcomed by Pedro himself, who immediately offered to take us out for a wander round the local area. His first find for us was a Cuban pygmy owl, which was roosting in a hollow tree but which then flew to an open perch when Pedro scratched gently on the bark. Great views were had of the bird as it glared down at us. This owl is endemic to Cuba. As we moved away, we were pleased to see that the owl returned to its original roost site. Pedro's second find was another owl, this time a bare-legged owl, then known as Cuban screech owl. The same back-scratching technique persuaded the owl to peek out of its nest hole. This Cuban endemic is strictly nocturnal, unlike the previous owl species, which explains why it did no more than to peek out of the hole. The owls were very unexpected, and we could not thank Pedro enough for the impromptu bird walk. We had asked about Fernandina's flicker and Cuban grassquit, but we were at the wrong time of day to see those species. Pedro offered to take us out again later, but we had to reluctantly decline. We had to get back to Cayo Coco and didn't fancy too much driving in the dark on Cuban roads. So we made the 4-hour journey back to Moran and crossed the causeway well before dark. There was enough light for us to have another poke around for Zapata sparrow. Still no luck with that species, but Western spindalis was always worth a look. It was our last full day in Cuba, so it was the last-ditch attempt for Zapata sparrow. We hit Cuevas del Jabalí very early and, yes, there they were, scrabbling around in the undergrowth along the entrance road. Phew, that was a relief. Zapata sparrow is of course a Cuban endemic. It was good to be still racking up the ticks on our last day. Having got the sparrow, the rest of the day was our own, that is once we had got a flat tire fixed. We had to put the spare tire on that morning. You are not allowed to drive more than necessary without a spare in Cuba, although we admit that we went to the Cuevas site first. Getting the sparrow was necessary. Now we had to head to a government office and mess around for an hour whilst the world's slowest tire fitters changed the tire for us and filled out about 40 forms. When we emerged, we decided to head to Cayo Guillermo and check out the wader pool and beaches once again. We went armed with a couple of cakes snaffled from the breakfast buffet and a packet of crisps purchased from the hotel shop as a lunchtime snack. It was very peaceful on the beach at Cayo Guillermo, almost like being proper holidaymakers. We weren't seeing many birds though, just a few laughing gulls lazing on the sandbars. They didn't stay lazing for long. We had tried the crisps and found them to be inedible, so thought to offer them to the gulls. That ended up with a wheeling mass of birds fighting for the scraps. It was quite a spectacle to watch. A soaring Cuban black hawk, perhaps looking for crabs for lunch, flew overhead. We took another look at the freshwater pond on the other side of the road and found a killdeer and a few American flamingos. At the other end of the Cayo, we dropped in again on the Bahama mockingbird. It was all quite relaxed. A prairie warbler hopped about in the bushes edging the pond. And we managed a last look at the endemic Oriente warbler. The car had to go back. Luckily, the office was right next to our hotel, so we declined the offer of a lift and walked through some scrub, liberally dotted with wet pools and shorebirds, back to the hotel. We would finish the day walking the grounds of the Crystal Laguna and its sister hotel, the Emperador. Greater Antillean grackles haunted the pool area, where unfinished snacks provided easy pickings. Northern mockingbird posed nicely for us too. We headed back out to the lagunas. No West Indian whistling ducks again today, but a good view of jellyfish. This seemed to be an upside-down jelly species, but we were not able to pin down the exact one. A new species of bird for us was a white-crowned pigeon. We'd been hoping to come across this species, but without any luck so far. Here it was, at the top of a tree in the late afternoon sun, and definitely worth the wait. One more species to add to our lists. Tricolored heron perched precariously on top of a small tree at the edge of one of the lagunas. So that was our first Cuba trip. Not huge numbers of birds, but lots of the Cuban endemics ticked off. 126 species seen and 42 lifers, so not bad at all. It certainly did not put us off returning to Cuba, which we did in April 2012. We have tried to relocate the Crystal Laguna without success. It probably was destroyed by Hurricane Irma in 2017, and maybe there is another hotel now on the site. We wonder if they retained the lagunas and boardwalks. We have a small travelogue of our 2 Cuba trips, available on Amazon. A different birding trip, to Ecuador, is described in our travelogue and in a series of 3 videos on our channel. We hope you have enjoyed this video. If so, please take a moment to like and subscribe. We have lots of birding and travel videos on our YouTube channel. Why not check it out? Thank you for watching.